us today. Once again, both of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Zahra, perhaps I can start with you. What stage do you feel we're in right now in Malta with regards to the opening of the airports and people anticipating what's to come?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the industry is very much looking forward to the airports opening and to having the first arrivals coming into Malta. In respect to the state of preparedness, because this is where we had to get our situation very exact, was that the protocols, both from the aspect of arrival at the airport for visiting guests, through transportation to hotels and establishments in the hospitality industry, have the protocols in place and have worked very hard to make sure that people's safety is paramount. And secondly, that they have an experience which they can enjoy, because at the end of the day, they're coming here to relax and to have a holiday.
I believe people feel very confident about traveling. Professor Brincat, from the health point of view.
Yes, I would like to see more science applied. Now, we have seen articles here on the opening of airports. I too, like my friend Warren here, welcome the opening of airports. We cannot stay closed down forever because there's more to life than just COVID. Now, we have successfully contained our infection rates. I think this has been for a combination of factors. And I don't think it was necessarily just one-off lockdown. I think people were careful. I think the nature of the disease, maybe the type of disease, maybe our genetics, but lots of things seem to have protected us, as indeed they did our friends in Sicily, our colleagues in Sicily, just 60 miles away. Over there, they did not have the same problems they had in Bergamo. And I have to remember where we started from. We started from a situation in February where we had these terrible scenes from Bergamo, one of the richest places in Italy, one of the hospitals that's best equipped in Italy with best protocols, really prosperous place. And suddenly they were overwhelmed with people having these terrible manifestations of the disease of COVID-19 as opposed to coronavirus. COVID-19 is the disease. And we had seen what had happened in Wuhan as well, in China. But this was the first experience in European soil. And from there, from Italy, the spread exploded. Most people, most countries had their first infections traced back directly to Italy, sadly, as indeed the South American countries. And we had these things. We did not know enough about the disease. We knew it was not just the flu, as some people were pretending. There was more to it than just the flu. It was a new virus. It was hitting a naive population from an immunological point of view. And it was causing thrombosis. It was infecting other organs, kidneys, liver, brain even. And of course, the lungs. The lungs was a very big problem. So here was a place that was overwhelmed, using ventilators, not enough ventilators, and everybody was expecting this wave to carry on. Certainly, this happened in places like the UK. The UK suddenly had a very similar problem. I was in the UK at the end of February, and nobody was thinking. There's a few cases in Wales, maybe a few cases in Scotland. Nobody thought that within a few weeks, my own original medical school, King's College, which normally had 50 ITU beds, would be catering for 150 ITU beds. These are severely affected people, not asymptomatic. So apart from severely affected people on ITU with a 50% mortality. And some people seem to think that this was a movie. This was a Netflix movie. It wasn't a real issue. These people are having these colleagues dying, friends dying. He got funerals from Bergamo. And of course, this was what we had in March. We had these scenarios.
And what about the opening of the airports
So
today?
anyway, so as time went by, we realized that things were more or less under control. Things got better. And people started reviewing the opinion of these from this terrible situation to the current state of affairs, which is very much one that is under control. So now there have been various so-called bubbles that have opened up. And everybody expected, for example, when the Baltic bubble opened, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, that there'd be a sudden spike. This did not happen. And now they're open to all other European countries. So I think that on July the 1st, we are going to open for a number of countries. And what we've been doing is we've been opening the tap very, very slowly. I still would prefer, to be honest, that now that we're seeing the old spike in Germany happening, the old spike in Spain happening, Australia having an outbreak here and an outbreak there, and of course there's still the disaster of South America and the States that's ongoing. I still prefer that when we opened up, we would apply some science, because not all Europe is the same. We have been told we are doing what Europe is doing, and this is not true. Europe is a number of different states. There are lots of different protocols in place. Some people have open borders, depending on which countries. Others are testing either after or before. I would favor testing before. We can, with 80 euros per person, test in the departure lounge, because I don't think it's feasible anywhere else, using 2 kits, one for antibodies and one the so-called CRISPR technology, which identifies the virus, having 85% specificity on knowing who's carrying the virus and who isn't. And this way, they'll be prevented from coming over. Because if they come over, we might revert back to a lockdown situation, which economically is much worse. We don't want somebody to land here, start off a minor epidemic.
So what you're suggesting is testing in departure lounges.
Yes, especially in countries that have still got a high, relatively high infection rate.
That causes a lot of problems. So if people have bought their tickets already,
yes, whereas
and go to the airport packed up and then
if they land, it's much worse, because if they land, you'll have to quarantine the whole flight.
Yes.
You'll have to quarantine the aeroplane and the crew. So it's a bigger problem. Whereas this, some form of compensation, or we have to work out something out. But it's not very expensive.
Can we refer to Professor Lawrence and Christian Hunt? You've been hearing all this. Thank you very much both for joining us. What are your views, Colin, about the airports and the borders opening now?
I tend to agree with the gentleman, what they've said. But I'm not optimistic myself, because so let's make it a conditional situation. In fact, I think compulsory to continue the testing, the 3 tests, the professor said, I agree fully, antibody testing, the new Roche test or the Abbott test, I think are compulsory. And also, I believe that you've got to continue with masks and social distancing. Now, here's an interesting thing. People think that this happens only in concentrated areas. This was the mistake in the United States of Florida, Arizona, all these states, where you don't have a concentration necessarily of people, and the virus is spread in the most dispersed areas and everything. So good to be cautiously optimistic, but to ensure that you have a testing regime in place, and you need good leadership. And I still believe there's got to be social distancing. It just takes someone to sneeze, spit, or even talk to you, and you can get this disease.
But I mean, how can
the elderly are very vulnerable, and they should lock down. They've got to stay at home, and of course it's correct. You can't stay locked down. So the idea is to have an optimal targeting regime. As soon as someone tests red, you track, shut down that area or group of people. That's what New Zealand did. They made a mistake. They let in 2 people, and they just spread a virus everywhere. On the flights they took, with the people they met, in the shops they entered. So I think we've still got a long way to go. And we should never be overly optimistic.
Mr. Zahra, please feel free to speak to Colin directly.
Well, hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I tend to look at the situation as being one which requires complete responsibility within the industry, and that we. If the solutions of providing a test or taking a test before departure from the country of origin can be implemented, and if such a test can be organized without it being a long-winded arrangement, when one's traveling, you want to try and relax at the end of the day, I think that that is obviously a positive. The thing that we want to do is to avoid any spikes over here locally.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Christian, from a human risk point of view, what are your views about the borders opening now?
Look, I think one of the challenges here is that clearly people carry the virus. So if you want to stop movement of the virus, you would lock down and stop people from moving. That clearly has economic impacts. And I think one of the challenges here is that you don't know who is carrying the virus because there are some asymptomatic carriers, which makes this a lot harder. So there may be people going around carrying the virus without realizing it. And I think the assessment that an individual can make about their own situation is unusual in the normal signals that you would have in that you were carrying, say, the flu, you would know. And I think one of the challenges we've got here is that people just don't know that. So even if you have people behaving incredibly responsibly and doing the right thing, they can't be sure for themselves without going through testing. There are also, I think, is a lot of confusion on the part of people around what is acceptable, what's not acceptable behaviour. You see a lot of examples, for example, in the UK, where the lockdown is being released slowly, and we're seeing lots of behaviour where people are assuming the risk of the virus has gone away. So I think what that means is we can't trust individuals to behave responsibly, in part because there aren't the obvious signs, but also because we've seen lots of examples where they have misread the risk of the situation. So I think the only thing the authorities can really do to allow the economy to open up is to put in place processes that allows some form of official control as to what is going on. So that one, you can monitor what's happening. Two, you can catch it before it becomes severe. And we should bear in mind that you can have individual super spreaders. And we've seen plenty of examples of just one single person can cause a major problem. So this is about looking at individuals all as individual units of risk, and we have to treat people on that basis. So the only way that I think is sensible to open up is not to rely on people to do the right thing, but to put in place processes that allow the authorities to track it, and also to send the right signal to people so they feel comfortable travelling, because those people who have concerns are not going to want to travel to countries unless there are appropriate controls in place, because they will fear for their own safety.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add on that if we look at the trade-offs, you sort of think if you shut down the economy, you want to get good gains, you want to start getting employment, you want to build confidence. But yet when we look at the relationship between employment and economic growth and opening up, you don't get the benefits unless you've shut down. So there's an optimal amount of shutting down. If you don't invest in that, now realize, look, Malta's ahead. In fact, the whole of the EU ahead of the United States and the United Kingdom in this. And the UK and US should learn what Europe are doing because they've done a much better job. But it does involve leadership, and it does involve reminding people at all times, it's not what is, it's what can be. This virus, the number of infections, is something in the future that's going to land up with excess capacity. You know, it can hurt the excess capacity in hospitals. So it's always about the future. It's anticipation of the future. Leadership is managing the anticipation of the future rather than the current. Christian just said, well, people, for example, in Bournemouth, swarmed to Bournemouth. It's boiling hot this weekend in the UK. And just think of that as super spreading in the UK. Each one of those, tens of thousands of people were crowded on the train coming back from Bournemouth and at the beach. They're going to spread it all over the UK.
Professor Brincat.
Well, first of all, I take the point, but we'll have to wait and see what the outcome of Bournemouth is, or indeed what the outcome of the Liverpool supporters is. We had a similar situation here with our Floriana supporters, and yet we did not have the spread. So, you know, situations do surprise you, because this is typical what we call chaos theory in practice. The tests I was referring to were two. One is an antibody test, and one is a virus test. They are both cartridge tests, and they both involve a drop of blood. But they're 18-minute jobs. We can have a result within 18 minutes. So I think applying a bit of science would give people more confidence. What we don't want is a false start. We don't want to open the airports, particularly on June the 15th, on July the 15th, when more airports will be open, and have a spike as a result of that, because that will help.
Because there won't be any testing in Malta.
Well,
right?
I'll be worried that there will be testing in Malta in the usual way for people who are symptomatic or people who present themselves.
Exactly, but not at the airport.
But that's closing the gate after the horse has bolted, you know. So I think there's some suggestion of testing people with a temperature before boarding a plane here in Malta, right? But that's outwards, not inwards. So anyway, I think if we are organized, I've got this sort of leadership, then I'm all for opening. I'm all for making sure we get it right, because the last thing we need is an erosion of confidence with a second blow. I'm not sure if these crowds will act as super spreaders. I do not know. we'll have to wait and see. We were surprised with our Floriana people because there weren't any cases from there. So for all I know, these healthy young people in Bournemouth and these healthy young people with a bit of alcohol possibly helping it in Liverpool might not be super spreaders. I'd be much more worried about people in the underground, for example.
Mr. Zahra, your comments about what Colin and Christian were saying.
Well, obviously, from an industry point of view, what we want is what we're seeing now is a gradual reopening, one where we've got very clear windows open. In other words, the selection of destinations has been very carefully planned.
Yes.
And we have in 2 weeks' time, and on the 15th, 16th of July, a further number of destinations opening up. I think if you consider the capacity that we have now coming into the island in terms of flights compared to this time last year, I believe it's somewhere in the region of around 27%. So we are not going to have the number of clients, visitors coming in.
So it's a very cautious start, if I can say
Yes,
that.
very
no,
much
I agree. I mean, the first group of countries, I don't see too much testing is necessary.
Yes, yes.
It's only from those countries where you've got a particular infection rate. That's where it might be worth it.
Colin, because Colin is still with us, I think.
Yeah.
We spoke earlier this week. Is there some way where we could have more of a uniform procedure about testing all over Europe, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the EU, all EU countries, should take some responsibility. The execution should be done, obviously, by countries. But I just look at the US as an example where the federal government has done very little, okay? So they could be the ones that are investing in the infrastructure of testing. My view would be that it's worth it to invest and just have comprehensive testing all the time. It's nothing, as the doctor explained, just to take a little pinprick and have more confidence. At the end of the day, if people aren't confident, they won't fly, they won't go to restaurants to eat. So everyone's in this together. It's not one versus the other. It's what is the optimal speed. And I think that government, including central government, in planning excess capacity in hospitals in case the virus takes off, in trace and track and targeting individuals that test positive, they've got to move very, very quickly. And the industry should have supported. And finally, I'd say, I think we're never going back to the way we were. So we should ask the guests, what do they think about the new normal? For example, seating. We know that if you cough or you sneeze into someone's face and there's ventilation, it can get into your face and you could get this infection. So you've got to change the seating structure. You've got to change the architecture. You've got to reduce capacity. And I would say that social distancing should be mandatory and depending on where you are. But the idea that you just remove social distancing, or in the UK, you've gone from 2 meters to 1 meter, that's not going to stimulate economic growth at all, because people are going to be concerned about it. People have to be optimistic.
Thank you, Colin. I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We're running out of time. I thank you both for joining us today. And that was Professor Colin Lawrence Christian Hunt from London. I am with Professor Mark Brincat here in the studio. And Mr. Warren Zahra will join you very soon. We're stopping for a short commercial break.